There was one wrestler, he, killed his family and he committed suicide. He was 40 years old, and during the autopsy, the coroner said that his brain looked like the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Now, there's some of that a lot of people would like to shut up. His name's Jacob Morrison. He is with the Valley Labor Report, but you can't shut him up because he's on 9:30 to 11 right here on WVNN. I enjoy his show an awful lot, probably more than I should, but I do enjoy his show an awful lot. And because this is the week of WrestleMania, something that is very near and dear to my heart. Grant was born around this time too, so it's kind of whatever. Yeah, that's kind of a thing. And in fact, he's kind of kept me from doing the things I want to do, like going off to Philadelphia this weekend or anything. So he screwed me. But that is just what it is. But Jacob Morrison and I were talking last week. There was an amazing. People don't know this. There's unions in sports, and they're very powerful. But there's one entity that is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has been able to rise to the level of prominence and profitability, partially because their main labor source is completely at their mercy. They have to sign non-competes. They don't get health care. They have no protections. They are literally independent contractors in the truest sense, and they can't sign with other wrestling organizations while they're independently contracting with this organization. It's pretty crazy stuff. Jacob Morrison, Valley Labor Report, does a lot of labor reporting, unionization, stuff like that. Jacob, I know you and I talked about this a little bit. The WWE and UFC have now joined into one company called TKO Holdings, and UFC actually has their own labor issues as well. These guys are putting their bodies on the line, lives on the line, really, futures, in exchange for immediate pay, but there are no protections. And this is a lot of people seem to have a real problem with this. Is there any change in this coming in the future?
I'm not aware of any change coming in the future, certainly. I'm not aware of any nascent union attempts at UFC or WWE. But, I think like the issues that you were talking about mean that they absolutely should be, just on the revenue side, we can talk about all of the health issues and the impacts on people's physical bodies and the way that the corporations don't take care of their athletes after their oftentimes short careers are over. But just on the revenue side, if you look at an organization like the NFL or MLB or the NHL, the players who obviously, they're the ones that create the value, they get something like 50% of the revenue generated by the sport. But in UFC, that number's 20%. In the WWE, it's 10%, right? And so, on that alone, that should tell, the athletes there that they should unionize because they're really getting gypped by the standards of professional sports.
Absolutely. I think there is an argument to be made here because the industry itself is just such a. And look, one of the things I think a lot of people have a problem with unionization is because the union entities that we see that make a lot of noise. It used to be factories were far more dangerous than they were. Okay, so there was unionization was very important in the sense of protecting people, time off, all that stuff. We know that history. But in modern world, we have government TSA agents unionizing, and people hate that kind of stuff. And that's sort of where I think the unionization, the love for unionization fell off for a long time. Obviously, the polling shows it coming back in big numbers right now. But I think that's where a lot of people have. This is, again, another entity where it's like a dangerous work environment. And basically, if you get hurt, oh, well. You could be protected if they decide to, but it's very much on the whim of the employer. And up until very recently, nationally, there was one major employer for each of these entities, UFC and WWE. One is legit fighting. The other is a work, it's carnival barking, that kind of stuff. And now they've combined. Now, there is a slight competition in the form of an AEW now for wrestling, but they sign guaranteed contracts there and stuff like that, but the protections still don't really exist. That's just on the whim of a billionaire named Tony Khan, who is losing money hand over fist on his corporation and what he's doing, but he has the backing of the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, his daddy. So it's a little bit different there. The history of unionization in wrestling is pretty interesting. Jesse Ventura went on to be the governor of Minnesota. He was considered a presidential candidate. I almost did a podcast with him at one point. Like, I was going to be the co-host on a podcast he was going to do, but he wouldn't leave Russian television, believe it or not. That was sort of one of the sticking points. But there was an attempt by him to unionize the workers back in the 80s, and the biggest star at the time, Hulk Hogan, I guess, stabbed him in the back and killed him. Do you know that story?
Yes, yeah, I'm familiar with that. Ventura's talked about it before, and it's in his book. But Ventura, and he got with I think it was Gene Upshaw, somebody in the NFL that Ventura knew from before it was then, obviously, and a lot of people know it was the WWF at that time. Mm-hmm. Gene Upshaw and Ventura were trying to work together to build a campaign, and they went and talked to Hulk Hogan because obviously, in the organization of a sport like the UFC or WWE, you really do need the support of the top talent to bring everybody else along, basically. And so they went and talked to Hulk Hogan about this because they knew that. And unfortunately, not only did Hogan not support the union campaign, he didn't get on board with it. But yes, he went and he told Vince McMahon about it, and McMahon, kind of went on a crusade. Going on these, kind of anti-union tirades. I believe he fired. If I'm getting this right, he fired Ventura, and it was, a really big deal. And now, obviously, the WWE still does not have a union, and the workers, the athletes, still, only take down 10% of the revenue that they generate, which is just an absurd number to think about. But the more important thing is what you were talking about, the health and safety kind of stuff. And even though some of these folks make a decent amount of money, most of them are not by any stretch millionaires, right? I mean, they're maybe making $180,000, maybe $200,000 a year, but then they've got to pay for health insurance because, like you said, I think you said it tongue in cheek, but they're classified as independent contractors, but by no means would anybody consider them independent contractors in like any true sense because they're totally beholden to this company. They can't do work outside of the company or even for themselves. And so they've got to pay out of that $180,000, $200,000. They've got to pay travel. They've got to pay health insurance. They've got to figure out a way to save for retirement. They're not going to be able to do this for 50 years. And a lot of there was one wrestler, forgetting his name, but he, killed his family and he committed suicide. He was 40 years old. And during the autopsy, the coroner said that his brain looked like the brain of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. That you're talking about Chris Benoit there, and he killed his family. That was a big shocker in all of this. As TKO Holdings starts to get more power, and you see UFC and WWE come together, they become stronger, and I think the bargaining power of the worker becomes weaker. I mean, they're making more money than they've ever made before. They may have deals with the Saudis to make tons of money. They made more money off of Saudi Arabia in 2 years than they made in 39 WrestleManias combined. I mean, they're making an insane amount of money, and that just is not trickling down to them. But what's interesting is, and we talked about the power of the workers, this is the problem I have, and it kind of exists in the radio business too. The issue is non-competes. Joe Biden had talked about doing away with non-competes, but nothing ever came of that. What happened there, and how would that, I think that's one thing, whether you're a super union fan or anything like this, the non-competes that is a real limit on people. Joe Biden gives garbage. At Taco Bell you can't go across the street and work. That's absurd. But it does happen in my industry, and we had talked about it, obviously in the wrestling industry as well. What's the status on the non-competes? And these entities combining really limit the power of the worker, right?
Right. Yeah. And Lena Khan, I think my understanding is that she's still working on this, the chair of the FTC. JD Vance is actually a big fan of Lena Khan, for what that's worth for folks. But you're right that non-competes really do kind of, they limit the, I mean, they're an impediment to the market, right? If people care about the market, ideally, what the market should be doing is trying to kind of find an equilibrium where, the supply is meeting the demand and you're being compensated for the talents and the revenue that you can bring in, and people can bid on the talent that you have. But non-competes, obviously, they don't allow the market to work. They don't allow workers to actually leverage the value that they bring, right? And so it's it's definitely detrimental. It's not free market, and it's clearly anti-worker. Another one of the things like that are NDAs, non-disparagement agreements, and that. Some of those NDAs have actually been made illegal for private sector workers by the National Labor Relations Board because the National Labor Relations Act protects workers and ex-workers' ability to discuss their working conditions with people, with their coworkers, with the public. That's the interpretation under Jennifer Abruzzo, the new NLRB General Counsel. And so another kind of something intersecting with this business space, Jared Monroe, former staffer for Steven Crowder, is now countersuing Steven Crowder for the NDA that he was placed under. He's got a labor attorney that's working for him now to try to get Steven Crowder's ex-employee out from under this NDA. So, NDAs, non-competes, terrible things, and the Biden administration is working to put an end to those and, let the market work, as it were.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are looking at a lot of these and with fresh eyes and questioning whether they're good for society and things like that. And like I said, the Biden administration made it very clear that they did not like these, and then they gave that same speech the next year at the State of the Union as well, the exact same example, and they did nothing about it. So I thought that was an interesting one. Let's take a quick time out. It's interesting. The state of unionization of these two entities, UFC and WWE, these combat sport industries, it seems very unlikely. That would be my take of unionization anytime soon. What do you think?
I think it probably is unlikely. Something about the sport, fighting, I think there's something that fosters individualism and as an ideology among the people. And then obviously the force, like you mentioned, that the companies have is just, there are a lot of things against unionization in the industry. But if the right people come along and do it in the right way, then obviously we know the athletes are the ones that generate the revenue. And so if enough of them can realize that and act on that, that's all it takes to successfully unionize the industry.
And the problem is, same thing with radio. The egos are so big that those at the top, they're not going to do anything to help anyone else. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. I mean,
Right.
This is an entertainment field, and there's a lot of people at the top. I mean, you talked about the whole Hogan situation.
Really quickly with the UFCW and the WWE, the sad thing is that it would actually, at this point, they're only bringing down 10% of the revenue. It would still help the top talent, right?
That's
if you're bringing down 50% of the revenue that you generate instead of 10%, there's more to go around, even for the people who are making millions and millions of dollars.
That's an interesting perspective, and I think you're right. But when guys are making $5 a pop doing this in gyms all over the country, the labor market. If you don't want to do it, fine. We'll find someone else who will do 27 flips and land on their head for $5, and we'll pay them $1,000. I mean, it's just there's a workforce issue here too. But you're right about a lot of those things. It's interesting to watch this and follow the story. If you don't know enough about it, go read about it. It's a very interesting story.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.